All right, welcome back to the last episode. This is gonna be pretty lengthy, so I saved one chapter for the last one. It's like 40 pages long, so we'll see how long it actually ends up being, just depending on like how long it takes me to read it. Just because there's a lot, but also I gotta elaborate like usual. Thank you to everyone who has made it this far, or if you just skip to the end because this is your favorite chapter, that's cool too. Let's just get started. So, this chapter is just called Love. One word. I'll go over multiple instances, examples, I guess. I reviewed it at my kitchen table beforehand. Hopefully I don't get emotional, but I might, so we'll just see what happens. I think I saved the best for last. That, or at least the longest. There's so much I want to go over in this particular chapter that I may actually have to leave some of it out, or at least cut out some of the details. You made it this far, so you're basically stuck now. You might as well finish it up either way. Relationships, friends, enemies, parents, other family members, movies, just people in general. We all have love stories of our own, stories that we like and stories that we don't. I suppose I'm going to make this book more realistic. In that case, I feel that it is paramount that I am more than comfortably transparent with you guys. So for those of you who read this and know the details, it's mostly a refresher course on my life. Also with the more not so pretty parts, I apologize, Mom. You raised an almost perfect son. I unfortunately had to make some mistakes on my own and never mention them. What kid hasn't done that though, right? To get this ball rolling, I of course have to use the easiest story of love in my life to break the ice and get everyone warmed up. It only seems right for me to let everyone into the world that is my adoption story. The story of me learning and experiencing firsthand the very definition of unconditional love by parents who aren't even my biological parents. Consistent, unwavering, and patient love. I was born in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to my biological mother, of whom shall remain nameless, as she deserves no further credit in this particular part of my story, and to my biological father, who to this day I have yet to meet or speak to. I've never even seen a picture of him, actually, so I have only about a 40 to 50% idea of where my looks and physical characteristics come from. One or both of these people are responsible for me being 5'6" after a good stretch and about 120 pounds soaking wet, before I discovered the small taste of heaven on earth that is the weight room. Bro, that's so cheesy. I apologize. Nowadays, I hover around somewhere between 165 and 170, depending on my food choices and my consistency at the gym. My curiosity about the two of those individuals honestly does not reach any further than that. Nothing against the man responsible for half of my existence, as I've learned for the most part that my wonderful mother, wonderful in quotation marks, was responsible for the rocky relationship that they had, hence the lack of knowledge of what he even looks like. It just isn't something I've ever had a desire to pursue. Although I pride myself on being a surprisingly patient person, I have an unbelievably low tolerance for drama of any kind. So even the slight potential of bringing any of that into the life I have now is just not worth it to me. Even if nothing ever happened just past like a meetup or a phone call, the guarantee is just simply not there. So as I often tell my friends, nah, I'm Gucci. I'm rather protective of the family and life I have these days anyways. For the first 5 or so years of my life, I don't remember much. I live with my younger half-sister. We have different biological fathers, and my biological mother. As I got a little older, from about 5 to 6.5, I was all over the place with my biological mother, with my grandparents, with my biological mother's friends, etc. There wasn't a definite home I remember until I moved in with my aunt and uncle way up in the mountains for about a year. During that time, I remember just about everything. Our house had a sweet view, our neighbors, the school I went to, my first girlfriend, and everything in between. Looking back at all that stuff as I write this, I don't even remember ending things with her at all. For both of our sakes, I hope she's not still out there expecting me to come back. I'm not coming back. It's just ain't meant to be, okay? That's kind of cheesy. I really shouldn't have put that in there. Reading over this, some of these are just weird. I apologize. I remember one day a family came and visited my aunt and uncle, and they had a daughter of their own, but they also somehow had my little sister with them. At the time, I didn't have any idea of how that was even possible or came to be, but I was just excited I had some kids of my own age to play with, so we went outside and let the adults talk. We played for hours. I showed them my very own room, the layout of the house, and where all the cool neighbors were and which ones weren't so cool. My aunt and uncle lived literally on the side of a mountain, so there was definitely plenty of room between houses. It wasn't your typical neighborhood with houses on either side. More so, a neighbor might be below you and slightly to the left, or above you and to your right just a hair. The street we lived on was essentially just a gravel road that wound around past everyone's houses. When throwing rocks from the porch at trees in the distance, I had to be particularly careful which way I aimed, as not to break a window below. I took it with the utmost seriousness because I would be starting quarterback in the NFL one day, so the earlier I perfected my throwing accuracy, the earlier I got rich and could buy my own mansion in the mountains. A couple of months after the family came to visit, it was right around Christmas time. My aunt and uncle decided to let me open not one, not two, but every single one of my Christmas presents early. I didn't have any idea why they decided to do that, but I thought it was the coolest thing in the entire world. Take that, loser kids who had to wait 6 more hours than I did to open their presents. I was ecstatic about all my new toys and was actively trying to cool down on the googly eyes long enough to decide on which one to open first when my aunt and uncle told me I was only allowed to choose one small toy to open. The rest were to be repacked in some boxes immediately. I thought it was some sort of sick game they were trying to play with me, which I was not about to partake in. But then they told me I was leaving. At first, it didn't really register in my head what they said, so I kind of just stood there confused. They repeated that I was leaving and that the majority of my stuff was already packed up. Then I started to freak out a little bit. What do you mean I was leaving? How could I be leaving? Where was I going? Was I supposed to just walk with all my toys and belongings in a red wagon like those kids from Disney Channel movies when they run away from home? Not to mention, once I was out on my own, where the heck was I going to go? I told myself I could walk pretty far, but what about crossing the street and all the highways? I initially got zero information and zero answers. I didn't know where I was going, but I had officially determined that I was going to make it on my own no matter what. They were kicking this poor 7-year-old to the curb, but someday I would be back. I would show them who they missed out on. Dramatic, I know. Like I said, I was 7. Not only that, but I had just turned 7 about a month and a half before this particular day. So yeah, 7-year-old Anthony was a bit ambitious for his age, and mostly in over his head, but he at least meant well. He was ready to take on the world. The world consisted of not much further than the immediate vicinity of his neighborhood, plus maybe about another mile or so. Any further than that just didn't exist to me at that point in time, I guess. After my mild hyperventilation, stammering episode was finished, they did tell me that I was not expected to just carry all my belongings and walk somewhere, but my grandparents were actually picking me up. So my initial reaction, that was a mix of hurt, terror, and anger-fueled determination, calmed down to a much more manageable and reasonable level. You guys ever see the meme that is just a picture of someone with a completely straight face, basically showing little to no emotion at all, and a caption that says screaming internally? Yeah, that was me on my way to my grandparents' van, trying to play it cool like I had everything under control. Of course I didn't, but no one else needed to know that. No one else needed to know how vulnerable and unwanted I felt at the moment. Not to mention, how do you even comprehend that as a 7-year-old? Even further, how do you tell someone else all of that in a way that makes sense when it doesn't even make sense to you? So I kept my lips pursed shut until my grandpa had packed all my newly unwrapped toys safely in the trunk space. Tight, safe, and secure to my satisfaction, of course. That stuff was quite literally as good as new, and if I needed to return any of it to make some extra cash for a bus ticket, I needed my trade-in value as high as it could be. As soon as my plethora of worthless toys were strapped in, my grandpa came to inspect my own work of securing myself safely into the seat. After giving a few satisfactory tugs with no unbuckling occurring, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and walked to his door to get behind the wheel. I immediately became a constant flow of questions, one after the other. In between each question, my grandma tried to sneak in a few words here and there, but the word vomit was already on full blast. Once I finally ran out of things to ask, I heard we were headed to some place called Oklahoma, but that was about all I got. It was going to take a little bit, 2 days in fact, but we would get there by Christmas time for sure. The first question after hearing that bit of information was how the heck Santa was going to know that I had just up and moved a million miles away, and where he was supposed to take my presents now. He both confidently reassured me that Santa knew where I would be and that he would never just leave all my presents in the hands of the wrong kid. The evening we left was the 23rd of December, so we had a few hours worth of driving to do that evening, then an entire day to finish it off after. This was more than doable. It just meant that Christmas Eve for me that year was spent in a car all day. We made the 2-day trip in about a day realistically, probably somewhere around 18 hours, I think. Being on the verge of 26, now 27, as I write this, details are a bit foggy in some areas, including all the stops for rest, food, and gas, plus the fact that we got to what was going to be my new home around 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve of all days. It seemed more like 19,642 days. The first official day I was adopted was technically Christmas Eve of 2003. My 7th grade teacher found that out and thought it was the cutest thing ever and didn't let me forget it all year. She said, "Oh, it's like a real-life movie. I'm going to cry." Me too, Miss G. Me too. At first, it didn't click that I was staying here for much longer than just the holidays. When it did, I cried and begged to go home, but my new parents did their best to explain the situation to my small mind. I just wasn't having it. Eventually, I cried all I could and just did my best not to think about it or ask, but why too much. I'll never forget the day because my parents never once got upset, got angry, or made me feel any type of way but loved and secure. And not a single day has passed since that one that they haven't done the exact same. Growing up, my mom stayed home while we were younger and always made sure we were taken care of. Breakfast, where my Pop-Tart obsession officially started, lunches for school, being physically taken to school and picked up after, helped with homework, got us clothes for the new year, supplies that would last, did our laundry, made sure we got better when we were sick, entertained us on the weekends, took us to church, and taught us how to have fun and to be good kids. My dad is the hardest working, most loving, and most humble servant leader I know. Other than Jesus himself, I couldn't choose a better role model to follow. My dad never misses a day of work unless he absolutely cannot work through whatever sickness he has. He always makes sure all the quote-unquote chores are done. I put chores in quotation marks like so because that's what the rest of us know them as, but my dad never considered them to be chores. They were simply things that needed to be done. Lawns mowed, house fixed, bills paid, cars running okay, food on the table, kids and wife taken care of, and all the other little things. My dad is the definition of a Renaissance man that I learned about in junior high. I swear he can do anything, and if there is even a sliver of a chance that he doesn't know, give him like 24 hours and he'll be right back on track with my previous proclamation of anything. He's the one that taught me how to treat others, how to treat a lady, and how to love and serve others without expecting anything back. This example of love is probably one of my favorite lessons my dad has taught me out of all of them. Reason being that nowadays, everyone is always in such a, okay, but what do I get in return for this type of mood, literally all the time. That's just not how I work, and it's hard to explain to other people why or how with a short, simple answer. My dad is the one who taught me the most about my faith more than anyone, and he always has an answer to the millions of questions I ask. Anytime I thank him for anything, he's always like, oh, no, it's no big deal, you're welcome. And I'm like, Dad, of course it is, and he just laughs. One thing I can tell people for certain, even without kids of my own, at the time of this writing, is to ask questions. Don't just believe everything you hear because mommy and daddy said so. Now, that's not to say that your parents aren't smarter than you and much wiser than you. I can most certainly say they are. I would say with about 99% certainty, actually. But you really have to know things like why you believe the things you do and where they come from. What if you don't agree? What if things seem a little fishy to you? You never know until you ask, my friend. I just happen to be so lucky that I do believe the same as my parents. The kicker is that I had to really take the time to sit and think about it and find out for myself whether or not I did. So again, ask questions and think for yourself. One of the biggest things you cannot allow yourself to think is that you can just be grandfathered into heaven. No matter how you were raised, no matter who in your family believes in Jesus or who doesn't, if you don't make the choice yourself, to put it lightly, you ain't getting jack squat. Nada, zilch, a big fat donut hole of nothing. Back to my wonderful parents, who aren't even technically my parents, but are most certainly my parents. No one else deserves more credit than the two of them for the person and man I have grown up to be. I'm not even their own kid, and they have a daughter of their own, my older sister, and she's got all their looks and physical traits and everything. I'm short, and she's super tall like my dad's side of the family. Even still, they treated me like I was theirs, and always have. They've loved me unconditionally through so much. I am far from the perfect kid, and I've had my fair share of groundings, butt whoopings. For all the sensitive people, I turned out just fine. It taught me to have respect for others. That's super cheesy. Just discipline your kids. Public service announcement to current parents and future parents. Please discipline your children. Until they reach a certain age, combined with a certain level of maturity, you are not to be their friend. You are not to be their homie or their bestie. Lack of discipline for the kids I grew up with has been the cause of so much unnecessary trouble. Not to me directly, but I've witnessed plenty of those kids turn into even worse adults. I frequently found myself taking the phrase watch and learn literally and making sure I don't turn into anything but hopefully the exact opposite of those kids. My parents had to take me to get school clothes, make sure I had extra things for when I played sports, got me a phone when I was old enough, and even made sure I had a car to drive when I turned 16. I've been quite a burden on them in multiple ways. Going back over this, I don't know if burden is the right word. It sounds a bit harsh, but Mom, you know what I mean. They loved me through all of it. They took me in and raised me into the person I am today. I will never be able to repay them no matter how hard I try to. If I am even half the parent they are, then I am certain my kids will be great. My sole aim in life is to attempt to be as good of a parent to my future children as my parents were to me. Long story short, the first example of love I have for you guys is my parents. For most of you, you're probably not all that surprised. Of course, a parent should love their child, right? Well, for one, you're absolutely right. But as a secondary thought, some parents don't. Some parents don't ever truly graduate to the terminology of parent per se. I would argue some cases that certain people are only ever deserve the title of birther or life giver and nothing further. Having personally experienced the difference between the two, it just be like that sometimes. Some people just are not good parents. Now, I'm not naive enough to think I got the worst of it. I've never been forced into any sort of foster care of any kind. I was never separated from my family completely. I was always around someone I knew to some extent. Never was I living with a stranger waiting for someone to, quote-unquote, want me. In those cases, I can't speak for anyone. Even when I could have felt less than loved, God always had me in a familiar place. God has a plan for everything. I can't say with any shred of certainty that he causes anything to happen to or for anyone, but I can say that He can always use your situation to your advantage and His. God always has a plan for you and your life as a whole. Your individual path and your struggles make you, you. Don't ever doubt that, and this next part should help make more sense in that regard. One day, much later than I probably should have, to be honest, I found out a truly incredible story about my parents. A story about something that happened even before I had taken my first breath of fresh air. This happens to be my next example of love, but more faith-based than the first. My older sister and I are about 9 months apart. Do the math in your head and think about it. How long does it take to make a baby? And before you try to get nasty on me, I'm talking about post-conception time. My older sister was born on February 13th, 1995, and then I was born on that same year, November 12th. Literally almost 9 months apart to the day. I knew that from almost the very beginning, but honestly didn't really ever put much further thought into it. For those of you who don't know, when a child is born, you have to get all their documents in order. Birth certificate, social security number, etc. Documents to prove you are who you say you are when you attempt to enroll in school, get a driver's license, or apply for any sort of job. On the morning of April 19th, 1995, my parents were supposed to head down to the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building to take care of all that stuff for my sister. I hadn't been born yet, let alone had they even given thought to adopting another child. They had to make sure they could manage to take care of the first one before anything like that. Again, do the math. I was about 2 months or so into being formed into my biological mother's womb at the time, but that's it. So she didn't even technically know me either. My dad told me that they set their alarm the night before so they could wake up and get there early the next day and went to sleep. But for some odd reason, the alarm never went off. They didn't wake up until much later than they had planned, and instead of rushing to make it downtown, they just decided against going at all. They proceeded to begin the regular morning routine of getting breakfast for their 2-month-old ready, as well as themselves. Once finished, they sat down and turned on the TV to catch what would normally be the last few minutes of the morning news report. While my parents were sleeping safely in their bed with my 2-month-old sister peacefully oblivious to any possible danger or catastrophe, a man by the name of Timothy McVeigh parked a utility truck packed with large drums of explosives right out front of the very building my parents were supposed to be inside of. He got out and abandoned the truck by the curb. He proceeded to blow half the building into absolutely nothing. McVeigh and his accomplice, Terry Nichols, killed 168 people, many of whom were children, and injured 680 more. My parents were supposed to be there, but they were not. Figured I'd get emotional at this. All right, let's see if I can make it through this. All because the alarm they vehemently remember setting did not go off. Call it coincidence, call it a faulty alarm clock, call it whatever you want. I call it God's plan working in action way before I had even taken my first gulp of oxygen. He had planned for them to adopt me, raise me, and make me who I am today. So he couldn't allow them to be there. He loved me, and he loved them so much that he intervened on their plans of waking up early by simply silencing the alarm, letting them sleep through what could have ruined any and all of those predestined plans. All the lessons, all of the love and the care, the laughs, the tears, and the discipline even. None of it, all because the little buzzing and beeping sound we often dread, myself included, wasn't allowed even a whisper. John 13:7 says, Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." At the time of them waking up, I'm sure my parents were frustrated that they missed their alarm. Who doesn't get at least somewhat annoyed when we miss our initial alarm, if not all of them? Quick shout out to those of you who, like myself, need to set 19 different alarms so they can all work together and waking me out of my deep hibernation. They certainly didn't intend on getting up that early by choice, especially when sleep was so hard to come by with a child that had no concept of time in the crib a few feet over. Then once they turned the news on and saw what was about half a building being reduced to smoke and rubble, they felt a mixture of shock and relief. I'm sure they were beyond grateful it didn't go off. Who wouldn't be? I am 100% certain that they couldn't have even begun to think they needed to be alive later on down the road so that some pale white, scrawny little redhead kid with too many freckles could come into their lives. Every day, I'm grateful for that. Every day, I'm grateful for the love, more or less, gushing from every pore in that story. Earlier, when I mentioned that God has a plan for you in your life, your struggles, and your inconsistencies, I meant it. God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and He is in absolute control. Just because you don't understand what is happening at the moment, or even why it's happening, doesn't change that. Scripture says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." Jeremiah 29:11-13. Yeah, this is hitting me a little bit more than I thought it would. But anyways, and scripture isn't supposed to be just words on a page, elegantly pieced together into a fancy-looking book. It's intended to be God's written word, so you absolutely can and absolutely should take it literally. God loves you. Now that all the sappy stuff is out of the way, I can bring in the broader range of love in all of its shapes and forms, whether it be with your family, friends, coworkers, strangers, and anyone I may have missed. Not all of it is going to be pretty either, so bear with me. Love isn't always sunshine and rainbows like you tend to see in the movies. Real love is hard, and real love is loss. Love is patient and kind. Love is not always happy, but it is most often selfless. Out of anything in the world that we could all be better at and just plain need more of, everywhere, it's love. First off, friends who just sit back and let you continue to be lazy, cut corners, and eventually become less than who you can be are not your friends. If your friends are not comfortable enough to tell you when you're in the wrong in any situation or simply not performing in your own life, they're not your real friends. Real friends want to see each other succeed and do great things throughout their lives alongside one another. How can that be possible if your friends just keep quiet when they see something you could be doing better at? Paired with wanting to see each other succeed is the ability to see someone else win without allowing jealousy to cloud your emotions and prevent you from celebrating with your friend. That is by far some of the most shallow behavior I can think of and have unfortunately witnessed it too many times. Seeing it once is seeing it too many times. If that individual is supposedly your friend, how on earth can you not be happy for them? Knowing what I know from previous experience, most of the people I see not clapping for their friends are usually the ones who weren't around when things were just starting out and or when things were difficult or slow moving. Real love for your friends involves all the fun stuff like cheering for them and getting excited when they achieve the things they've been working for, but it has to involve the not so fun stuff as well. The most common attribute we all share with each other is our imperfection. Not a single one of us is perfect in every single area of our lives. Our friends are supposed to allow us to be comfortable with that. We cannot control certain things like our height, personal example here, but outside of a wisecrack here and there, my friends don't genuinely put me down for that or tell me to do better by any means. Like I said, it's not in our control. Things that are in our complete control look like our attitude and actions towards our servers at the restaurant, no matter the service we're being given. Our work ethic at home, work, and in the gym are also examples. If you and a group of friends go out to eat somewhere, and one or multiple of your friends begin to badmouth or mistreat the server, the love you have for your friend should include being able to point out the lack of humor in how they're treating that individual, to point out that they need to chill out and go easy on the same person directly in charge of the very food you're about to put in your mouth and digest. It needs to extend even as far as urging your friends to clean up the attitude and apologize to your server. That may seem small, but you would be surprised how fast people respond if someone they consider close to them calls them out in front of everyone else. Not to mention how fast the rest of the group of your friends will chime in too. It's unfortunate to make your friend feel embarrassed like that in front of everyone, but it's absolutely necessary sometimes. If you aren't comfortable enough with your own self or the company you keep to speak up in a situation like that, you certainly need to do some work. Either work on your self-confidence, so you feel okay speaking out like that, or you need to find some new friends. One of the most eye-opening things I've ever experienced happened in my early high school days, and it was a conversation I overheard. I don't even remember why it happened like it did. The conversation I overheard was between a few upperclassmen and one of the assistant coaches. I want to say it was headed to the locker room after football practice one day, so I was just mindlessly following their path. One of the less outgoing, quieter assistant coaches was speaking to a few of the upperclassmen players ahead of me. I didn't really hear any of the conversation other than, "You are the sum of the 5 people you hang around most often, so choose those 5 people wisely." Initially, it made complete sense. It was almost too obvious that I brushed it off as nothing. After changing out of my pads and making my way outside to wait on my mom to pick me up, I started to think back on it and thought I would ask my mom what she thought about it. As soon as I hopped in, I told her I had a question even before I finished buckling myself in. With not even a split second to think about it, she told me that my coach was right. She mentioned how she and my dad could usually tell whether I would be friends with someone for very long or not within a short time, based on how they raised me, of course, but also coupled with the fact that I could see through people rather easily. At the time, I didn't really know what that meant, but as I grew older, I noticed myself slowly separating from people I was initially pretty close to and preferring to be alone rather than in bad company. Sounds a bit lonely and sad when I read it out loud, but it was the truth. I was always mindful not to make it incredibly dramatic, but I slowly gravitated towards a completely different set of people in some areas. It wasn't necessarily anything against those friends in my past, but more of a realization that I didn't want to be the sixth, insert less than personally appealing adjective here. I haven't always known exactly what I wanted to be or do with my life, but I've always had a pretty solid idea of what I didn't want to be or do. I didn't start paying attention to my work ethic or the work ethic of others until I got into my first college class. After a few weeks, I started doing the math of where I could have been in terms of progress if I hadn't taken my senior year of high school so easily. I didn't play any sports my senior year, and I didn't take any class that would even be remotely difficult. I elected to take some concurrent classes at the community college I would attend full-time the following year, but they were on some of the easiest core classes that were available. In terms of overall time, as well as the big one, money, I could have been a full year further along the degree path itself, and then an entire year less broke. Although these days I don't imagine I'd do much with college anymore, but I do think back to what it would be like and where it would be if I had someone who would have just pushed me to do more. My friends and I had just taken the route of enjoying it because it was our last year together, and high school didn't mean that much in the first place, which technically, it really doesn't, but you know what I mean. After we all went our separate ways, I don't think a single one of us except Bryce earned a degree, so way to go, Bryce. Midway through college, I began to make the gym and weightlifting more a serious part of my life. A few of my friends from high school had tried it, but it never really stuck with any of us, including myself, until this time, and then it stuck with me for good. Working at the YMCA is where I met a lot of the friends I have today and was a huge catalyst for where my life ended up going. Again, surround yourself with the right people who are at least headed in the same direction as you. It doesn't have to be the same exact endpoint and destination for everyone, but everyone going in opposite directions doesn't help anyone. That only slows you down. Working out is probably one of the easiest ways to see an immediate return on your investment. The harder you train, the better your nutrition and sleep, the faster your results. Your quote-unquote newbie gains stage can really set the tone for your future. That's where I learned the most about myself. Yes, of course, looking huge in the mirror was always cool, but also you learn more mental side of things. How far can I physically and mentally push myself? Where is my ego at? Am I truly here to get better, or am I here to goof off and talk to my friends? There were only a select few people that would understand that. And those are the same people I chose to hang around for the majority of my career at the YMCA and further. I trusted them to push me when necessary, and likewise, they entrusted me with that same responsibility for them. Next up would be in your everyday life. I already know that a lot of you are going to roll your eyes or make a weird look at these next few sentences, or possibly an odd combination of both. One of the biggest lessons I've learned in my 26 years is that life is just a series of small daily habits coupled with our everyday choices. Seems logical enough, right? What most people don't understand is that the smallest of each of those things determines the exact condition of your life. If your daily habits consists of more lazy and productive choices than productive choices, you're going to reap what you sow. If you cannot do the smallest of things, what makes you so sure you can handle or even deserve the opportunity for anything major in your life? I always tell people that the easiest way to clean up your life is to start by making your bed every morning. That's right. Super cringy, it seems pointless, and I definitely stole it from Jordan Peterson. But it's about momentum. Once you can develop the simplest of habits, you can translate that to any area of your life. Once your bed is made, your messy room just looks out of place. So now you also have the urge to clean it up. Not for any reason other than it would match better with your freshly made bed. Now it's time to walk out of your room and into the kitchen for breakfast, and you notice the pile of dishes still waiting on you from the previous night. Do you get where I'm going with this? I know it may seem like a bit of a stretch, but I'm completely serious. Alfonso and I get along extremely well because we both know the small stuff matters just as much, if not more than, the big stuff. We trust each other enough to get things done around the house, and if one of us has an unusual amount of stuff on our plate, no problem. I got this, and you can grab the next one. It's as easy as that. If one of us begins to slack off, there's usually only one conversation to be had about whatever it is. The most common thing Alfonso and I get made fun of for caring about is incredibly simple. It's mostly an occurrence for guys, but I know it's possible for girls too. Leaving pee droplets on the toilet seat, paired with whether someone restocked the empty toilet paper roll or not. It's by far the easiest thing in the entire world to take care of, and it's easily the most obvious way to see what kind of person you're dealing with. Not one single time in the 6 years I've known Alfonso have either one of us allowed the other to get away with not taking care of those two tasks. It's a no-tolerance policy, and we've never strayed from it. So much so that even when we call other people out on it or even mention it, it makes people uncomfortable. If you can't do the simplest task, like cleaning up after yourself, you're in no place to blame anyone else for your life not being where you want it to be. Actually, let me take a break. That was a little heated for a sec, so let me just segue into this is going to be a little bit nicer of a paragraph. Romantic relationships, started rather late for me in life based on most people's standard of dating these days. For most part, I was simply watching everyone else my age try and fail a million times, so I got a lot of free education by just paying attention to all the stuff other guys did wrong. I didn't have an actual girlfriend myself until I was about 18, and even then, I was so lost that my parents followed me to the girl's house to make sure I didn't get myself physically lost on the way there. I was an absolute mess, to be honest, but we made it all the way from there to here. This particular girl was the girl I tried to do everything for. I bought her flowers, jewelry, dates all the time, etc. I didn't have any sort of bills to be responsible for, so all I had to do was put gas in my car and buy her anything and everything I could think of. The way I saw it, if she was happy, then I was happy. There were rarely any disagreements, let alone any sort of real fights between us, because we saw each other as our very best friends, and we both had the same sense of humor. It was almost all laughs, all the time. Nowadays, I know that as the honeymoon stage of relationships. We never really made it past that stage into a more reasonable state of being together because she moved off to college and we weren't able to keep the long distance thing going. We sure tried, but in the end, it just wasn't meant to be. I learned a lot about myself throughout that relationship and through the breakup. First off, I was extremely liable to become immediately attached and go all in all at once. Also, my whole life was basically eating, sleeping, and working to pay for dates and gifts and nothing else. It was me against everyone else trying to get in the way of all of that. Sounds really healthy, doesn't it? How embarrassing, even just typing it out or speaking it. The bright side was that she was all for it and did the exact same for me. So it was at least mutual, no one-sided spending time and money for nothing. Like I mentioned, during that particular time, it was me against everyone trying to get in my way. I was not a nice person. I lacked an incredible amount of empathy for others and maturity, and honestly was just plain mean to everyone because I felt like I was king of the world. My attitude could not be matched, and I got myself into a decent amount of trouble at work and at home for it. The worst part about my attitude was that the girl by my side was really by my side, so she never saw anything wrong with what I did, always took my side, and made me feel better. She even made sure to validate my feelings of distaste for anyone trying to confront me about it. This goes right back to surrounding yourself with the right people. If you only have friends who take your side in everything and never disagree with you, you need some new friends, or a new girlfriend in this case. If you ask anyone I worked with at this particular time, or even my own mother, they would tell you something similar. I was a complete jerk to anyone I saw, and no one could tell me otherwise. I had it set in my mind that I was better than everyone else, and people should not even bother me because I knew everything I needed to know about life, relationships, all of it. Boy, did I have that come back to bite me in the butt. The biggest lesson I take away from that year-ish or so of my life is that although I had the right idea about making sure my lady was treated well, and we both had each other's backs, my brain and my heart needed a reality check, and a quick one at that. I certainly wasn't a bad boyfriend, but I was a pretty awful everything else. Eventually, that would inevitably show itself in our relationship somehow. We just never got that far, and I think both parties would be in agreement that we are glad we didn't. I think it was another couple of years before I ever made the leap into a relationship again, but between each of those instances, I grew a lot. One of the biggest growth examples I would not necessarily be considered a relational one, but it translated eventually. I got into reading again, somewhere close to the level I was in at elementary school. I most often read to learn something new, and I didn't usually read fiction or fantasy books for fun, so on the rare occasion that a friend recommended a book I would actually read, it ended up being The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Having been single for an extended period of time, along with me reading to learn and be better in whatever area the book's covered, I instantly jumped at the chance to start reading it. This will hopefully just be a quick review for those of you who have read it, but for those of you who have not, it's an incredibly eye-opening read. Each of the 5 love languages tell us how one expresses and receives love. Some people express their love with physical touch, others with gift giving. Certain people receive love from their significant other or family or friends by accepting acts of service, and others spending quality time with those they care about. As with communicating in any language, it's important for both sides to understand which language is being used at the time and make sure that both sides comprehend it. If you're in any part of South America, just assuming you can walk around only knowing how to speak and understand English, you're going to have a rather rough time. It is important that you know the proper language used among that population and subsequently know how to speak and understand it in any foreign country. If your significant other receives love by acts of service, but all you do is go out and buy them things, they may be nice and say thank you, but they won't truly be able to receive the love they're wanting from you. No matter how hard you try, if you aren't speaking the proper language, things just aren't going to go as you planned. You have to be aware of which love languages to get good at, just as you need to be well aware of which one you are, so you can communicate that to your significant other. Relational love is a lot simpler than I believe people of my generation have made it out to be. It's just that everyone is so dang selfish nowadays. It's all about me and what I want, and who cares what they want. If I get what I want first, only then can they have what they want. Sounds somewhat reasonable until the math doesn't add up because someone has to be willing to go second and absolutely no one is willing to do so. Maybe I may have watched The Notebook too many times, but it seriously baffles me when I see the stuff other people will fight over, be petty about, and even break up over. It's not that serious. Just be slightly less selfish for once in your life. I will admit, yes, I've seen The Notebook numerous times along with a bunch of other super cheesy, lovey-dovey movies like A Walk to Remember, but I can also confidently say I've been lucky enough to have a few real-life examples to watch and learn from. I promise I'm not completely clueless with my head and emotions in La La Land. My parents, although not 100% perfect all the time, because that's simply impossible, are an easy first choice. Second would have to be my Aunt Lynn's and Uncle Lee. The privilege to sit back and just watch these two couples has taught me more than 1,000 books or movies ever could. Throughout my entire life, I was one of 2 kids to have parents who were still married among all of my closest friends. That in itself could be all I have to say about my parents for the remainder of the book. They've been married for longer than I've been alive at this point. Keep in mind, as I've said before, I'm adopted, so the length of their marriage does not correlate with the length of my life so far. It just conveniently parallel. When I was much younger, I don't think I really ever gave my parents the credit where it was due. I knew the majority of my friends, along with more than half of my school, had divorced or at least separated households. Growing up, I did periodically hang out and spend the night with kids whose parents were divorced. So one night we would be playing Call of Duty at one place, and the next day after breakfast, we'd headed to the other place that may or may not have Wi-Fi set up. I never complained or thought too much of it because neither place was my house. All I had to do was just go back to my house whenever I wanted. There was Wi-Fi, a stock fridge, and my own room with PlayStation coupled with a wide array of games to choose from. Aside from my childish habit of focusing on whether we would be able to play Call of Duty or not, the biggest thing I was acutely aware of was the difference in rules. Certain things were cool at one place, and then those same things would get us into trouble at the other. I was smart enough to know that there was just different parenting styles, but I also knew which houses I liked to be at more. For obvious reasons, the houses with strong Wi-Fi connections and fewer rules happened to be the fun ones to be at. My house hovered somewhere in the middle. Enough freedom to do whatever I wanted and whenever, but also enough rules to make sure I knew which responsibilities belonged where on the list of importance. I could stay up until 4 a.m. playing video games if I wanted, eat whenever and whatever I wanted, and neither of my parents would mind. My dad might crack a joke here and there about how I slept until noon every day, but that was about it. My parents never had any issues, as long as I knew that I had to also still keep up with all my responsibilities. School, when I was still attending, work and showing up on time, and helping with things around the house. Chores like making sure the dogs were taken care of, stuff like that. All that to say, my parents showed me a lot of teamwork in a relationship. My mom didn't always think the same as my dad in terms of what we kids were and were not allowed to do, but they were always willing to talk things over. They listened to each other, their reasonings, where they could find some sort of middle ground, and came to a decision. My dad is a little more old school in how he does things, whereas my mom is a bit more laid back, but in the case that my dad made any decision, my mom was sure to enforce it. Like any normal kid, my sisters and I had all three at some point or another tried to go around one parent in the other in hopes of getting a quote-unquote better answer. That rarely worked, if ever. My parents communicate well between themselves, so even if one of them has not been directly involved, or we try to lie our way into an ideal answer, they could usually tell before we finished whether it was truth or not. If it sounded too good to be true to either one of them, that was basically the end of it for us kids. Either the conversation was completely over altogether, or you were in for some real trouble later when you were confronted about trying to put them against each other. Communication and teamwork are among some of the greatest lessons I've learned from my parents. It certainly matters outside of romantic relationships as well, but those two things are of dire importance for the romantic ones. To reference the Bible here, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16 mentions unequally yoked with another. For those of you who aren't too familiar with more biblical terminology, this is one of those times where you can take it quite literally, no matter your previous experience with the Bible. Imagine 2 cows, horses, etc., any animal of your choosing. Place a yoke around their necks and then dangle some sort of treat or incentive in front of them just out of reach. The most obvious step after would be for the animals to take a step in the corresponding direction for that treat. What happens when you hold one treat for the left horse slightly to its left and the right horse's treat slightly to its right? They will only both be focused on themselves and their treat, and they will begin pulling in opposite directions. No matter how hard each horse tries, neither one will quite reach their corresponding reward. To us humans who have the ability to think and weigh out options, the smartest way to go about it would be to move forward towards one treat at a time, right? Who goes first, though? Who gets their reward first and why? The ability to communicate amongst each other appropriately is the only way any solution comes to be. Without communication, combined with some level of teamwork, no one wins. Along with that, of course, someone has to draw the quote-unquote short straw and hold off on their portion of satisfaction for the time being. Again, Without proper communication, that's quite impossible. No matter what the situation was, once my parents had come to a decision, it was set. Even if one disagreed with the other, that disagreeing party would enforce whatever decision was made with the same enthusiasm as if they had gotten their way in the discussion. No team can survive if any part of it isn't holding up its own weight. Not in sports, not in the workplace, and most certainly not in relationships. Good teamwork and communication sometimes come with sacrifice of personal importance for the betterment of the entire team. Looking back at my childhood friends' parents, amongst them was the inability to find any sort of middle ground, whether it be immaturity, infidelity, or just the lack of proper communication channels. The older I get, and the more I go through my own experiences with romantic and also workplace relationships, the more and more I appreciate my parents. Whether they meant to be or not, simply having their relationship to watch with a front row seat has taught me a million and one things about how to be the best partner I can be. The highs, the lows, and all of it in between have been wonderful. The last little tidbit I'd mention about them would be their affection towards each other and not hiding it. It used to gross me out when I was younger, and they have continued to use that against us kids, in a good way of course, but I realize that it shows us kids that we shouldn't be afraid to show affection for our significant others, no matter who is watching. Obviously, there is a time and place for everything, but I truly feel it is important to publicly show your level of adoration to your kids. It sets the bar for the type of love they'll show and also plays a part in what they'll look for in someone else. My Aunt Lindsay and Uncle Lee are up next. Among a lot of similarities between my parents and these two, there are particular lessons I've learned from them specifically. First off, I should probably mention that they're technically now my aunt and uncle. Throughout junior high and high school, I grew really close with them and have since just adopted them into my own family. The feeling is mutual, and Aunt Linz just calls me her favorite kid the majority of the time now. I've always known that I would have an extra place to crash if I ever needed it, no questions asked. As with my parents, Lee and Linz are some of the hardest working people I know. Lee is captain at the fire station, and Linz owns her own law office. When they're not working, they're probably working to remodel the next rental house or cabin, all on top of being stellar parents to their own two kids. With that kind of workload and having kids who play multiple sports, that teamwork and communication I mentioned earlier is an absolute must. The environment at the Andrews household is a lot like my own house, which is probably why I feel so comfortable there. Plenty of freedom within more than reasonable boundaries. Anytime one of my cousins says anything about the rules, I always do my best to offer the kid who is only slightly older opinion and try to tell them it's certainly better this way, especially versus some of the other upbringings I've witnessed from kids I went to school with. That usually does well to pad my reputation as the favorite kid. What can I say? From an outside perspective, you wouldn't be able to tell, but Lee and Linz are opposites of each other. Lee's a lot like I am, more mild-mannered and super easygoing. I don't think I've ever heard him yell or even raise his voice unless it's mid-laughter or talking over a crowded living room while watching a Sooner or Saints game. Lee will pretty much be anyone's friend instantly without even trying. Aunt Linz is the same way, but I pity anyone who gets on her bad side. She's not afraid to speak her mind and tell you straight to your face what she thinks about you. It takes a lot to get to that point, but I'm fairly certain you did everything necessary to deserve it once you're there. Aunt Linz is the epitome of the modern saying, I don't need no man, but in the best way possible. A lot of today's society on social media platforms and any news channel try to promote certain image of what a lady is supposed to act like, talk like, dress like, etc. Aunt Linz likes to give each and every one of those examples a giant middle finger. She isn't afraid to be outspoken and knows exactly how to defend herself if you try to step to her about any of her opinions or beliefs. That's one of my favorite things about Aunt Linz, and I've taken notes on more than one occasion because of it. In a relational aspect, the two of them are inseparable. They're both each other's best friend in the whole world. I obviously don't see what they're like every single day because I'm at my own house, but I don't think there's ever been a time where I didn't hear both of them laughing hysterically with each other. They just have fun with each other no matter what. As long as they have each other within arm's reach, everything else will figure itself out. It's their world, and we're all just playing our respective roles in it. They're just like me when I was in my first ever relationship. Not a care in the world, and all I did was laugh a ton and take care of my girlfriend. You may recall I was a particular toxic individual outside of my relationship at work, and oftentimes towards other people for no reason at all. So that's where Uncle Lee and Aunt Linz break the mold. They both, as individuals, are some of the kindest and most caring humans on the planet. You'll be hard-pressed to find a more selfless person than Lee. After being involved in a 5-car wreck on the highway due to a guy behind the other 4 of us texting and driving during 5 o'clock traffic, somehow, out of absolutely nowhere, Uncle Lee was right there waiting on me. While I gave my information and my part of the story to the highway patrol officer, he waited the entire time. Didn't complain one bit, and even gave me a ride home after all the chaos was sorted out. Not sure how that managed to conveniently work itself out, but in my opinion, God just likes to show off every now and then. I sure didn't mind. I don't believe Aunt Linz has ever hesitated in her whole life to add room for another chair to fit at the dinner table. Doesn't matter what's for dinner, who is coming late. They will have a seat and a full plate to eat. I've witnessed that on more than one occasion because I've been that random extra plate more times than I can count. Aunt Lynn's is also one of the few people I truly feel relates to how I feel about dogs. The dogs are better than humans any day of the week, and you can never have enough of them to go around. As I write this, the Andrews household is home to 4 French bulldogs, each one with an old-style king or queen-esque name, like King Harry or Queen Agnes. I don't know how to explain it to you if you don't get it, and Aunt Lynn's just gets it, so that's all that matters. The biggest lesson I've always taken from these two is how to still have fun. They're no longer teenagers in love, and they still act like it. Call me crazy, but I believe that is where all romantic relationships should be. Maybe I've seen too many movies, but I've seen it firsthand. Not to mention my own personal experience with something similar. How many of you have seen the post floating around social media that says that an average person has around 3 loves in their life? The first one is the young and dumb with lots of fun one. This one doesn't often last long, but because life after high school begins and everyone starts taking steps down their life path, that often ends up going in opposite directions. No hard feelings, but you appreciate the experience. Next up is the hard one. This is the one where you get hurt badly. You fall quickly and you fall deeply. For a while, things seem to be going greater than ever, but it ends up coming to a breaking point somewhere down the road. Things do not end well for you. No matter the actual reasoning behind the ending, the only thing that matters is that you don't agree and you don't want it to end. Too bad, it does anyways. Now you're left all by yourself and no one can help you but you. Time drags on like someone put everything in slow motion. Food in general is no longer appetizing, and sleep is the only thing that helps numb the pain. This pain is pain I've felt personally, and it could not have come at a worse time in my life than when it did. I don't wish that kind of deep emotional pain on any human that ever walks this earth. I've described it to other people as completely unavoidable. With back pain or a headache, you can take some medicine. A stomach ache can be solved by either taking a seat in the bathroom or by eating something to curb the gnawing feeling you get after an extended period of time between meals. This kind of pain, there's nothing you can do to get around it. It demands to be felt and to be endured. What I've learned from that time period is that although it was quite literally the lowest point in my entire life, coupled with other issues being pancaked on top, I wouldn't change it. Going through something like that changes you into something and someone you can never be without it. The true mark of a man is how he responds when everything is stripped away. How does he move forward after all of the wind and rain die down? Does he sit with his head in his hands and blame everyone else and the world around him? Or does he get back up and start to take back control of his life again? A common thing I brought up periodically through this book is the word perspective. For you to have the proper perspective, sometimes you have to go through some pretty terrible things before you truly understand what it feels like from the outside. I would never change the instances that occurred because they gave me that perspective, and I carry it with me every day. Whether it be someone I'm close to going through a similar situation or just looking out into the world I live in, I'm more patient and more willing to offer empathy instead of immediate judgment. Worst case scenario, I have tips to offer how to make the next person's situation take a positive turn sooner. The third kind that this entirely random social media post mentioned was the last one. This is the one you finally find after all the growing pains, the patience, and the experiences add up. I've yet to settle into that one myself, but thanks to my parents, Uncle Lee and Aunt Lynn's, I know what that looks like. I know what it can be, and I know not to settle for anything less than that. You just have to be patient. The best quote-unquote relationship advice I've ever gotten, instead of looking for someone who checks off all the boxes on your list, you should simply focus on becoming someone you'd be attracted to yourself. Become the absolute best version of yourself. That way you know what you do and don't like, what you do and don't tolerate, and most importantly, have a better understanding of the more tangible things you personally want in a significant other. This doesn't mean you focus on becoming perfect in every area, because that's an endless and worthless pursuit. Just focus on becoming better, a better version of your true self. Technically, that's the end of this chapter, but this overview is like 1 page, so we're just going to finish that, and then I will elaborate. So there you have it. A complete book written with the intent to simply encourage you to be yourself, to be unapologetically you without putting too much pressure on how other people around you feel about it, by using personal experiences throughout my own life so you can better understand where I'm coming from. I feel that I have so much more to say, but I think that's space and time for another book later on down the line. The purpose of this initial volume of stories is to help give you a perspective of where I'm coming from, where, when, and how I grew into who I am today, and making sure I give credit where the credit is due. Before I just endlessly encourage you to become fully you without considering who you are and where you came from, I wanted to set out a few examples of myself. This collection of stories is so you know where I'm coming from. To know that I'm not just some ignorant kid from South Oklahoma City telling you to get your lazy butt off the couch and make something of your life. Although I sit here at my kitchen table writing this ending at 26 years old, I've had my fair share of learning opportunities. I've had the people closest to me tell me no, and I'm crazy. I've been through some stuff on my own, and I've more than likely heard plenty of the things you're beginning to hear as you step out of your comfort zone. With this first installment, I just want you to use it as a way to get to know me better. to see where I get all my quirks, where my thought processes start, and how I view the world. It's not ever going to be perfect, and it's certainly not done evolving. But this one right here is all about Anthony's perspective. Perspective matters. Once you've taken a good look at yourself in the mirror, been brutally honest with yourself on where you're at in life, and finally come to terms with who's responsible for these next steps you take, then the fun begins. Or should I say the work? It's a lot more fun when you take full control and responsibility for your life, but it would be naive of you to think it will always be fun. There is plenty of hard work to be done, and you must not shy away from that reality. I can promise you this with everything that I am now and everything I will ever be, it'll be worth every minute. Antoine out. All right, so that was it. That was the final chapter. I did say at some point that it was going to be the longest, whether it was in this video or the last one, and it definitely was because we had to take 2 camera breaks and a bathroom break just so I could make it through and like actually have all the information put together. So thank you for staying. I do and don't apologize for getting emotional earlier. It's just what happens. I kind of knew it would, but I didn't know it was going to be that bad. So thanks for making it to the end. Few things. This is just the beginning in terms of like I plan on writing more books. Just be, you will adjust. That was the initial title idea, and the more and more I see things like on Instagram or like books that are also titled something very similar, it becomes more and more cringe to me, but also like it's not, because I fully agree with this statement. Clue to whoever listens to this final chapter. Next book is like be you, but better. Because like obviously you be yourself, but if you're a piece of garbage, don't be yourself. Be better. So that's the idea with the next one. This one is literally just to give you perspective of like where I'm coming from. So I'm not just trying to like assume I know everything and then tell you guys what to do with your lives. But that was kind of the idea with this one. I kind of touched on that on the overview part of the chapter, but that is the idea for the next one. I already have like numerous chapter titles and ideas like brainstormed. So for those of you on YouTube, you could see it literally like a note on my phone that says like book 2 brainstorming. And there's like plenty of stuff. So I already have ideas and like just need to sit down and write. But it hasn't really been very high on the priority list, just with like getting all this out, all this information out, all this content would be probably a better word for that. But obviously like the clothing I'm wearing, I'm trying to release some of that for like the anniversary of the book, which is coming up in a couple weeks. But it just hasn't been very high on the priority list just because obviously we got to get all this stuff out first before I move on to the next one. So now that this is fully out and published, then I will continue to move on. Biggest thing is most people say they want to do something and then that's it. They just say I want to do it. Maybe someday, maybe one day. They're all talk. I refuse to be all talk. So I have written and bound and printed and done all of this to make an actual book that you can buy and read or listen to, depending, obviously you're listening to it right now or watching it, but you go to my website, you get your own copy. The biggest thing is I did what I said I was going to do, and that is not going to change. Hopefully it'll just get better quality on later on down the line. So if you have a dream, you got to chase it. I know I've said that numerous times throughout this entire like series of me releasing videos like this, but it's very important that you do that. Doesn't matter who tells you no. Doesn't matter who tells you it's dumb. It doesn't matter if people say that you can't or you won't or whatever. You got to go for it. Doesn't matter what it is. Whether you want to be an author as well, cool. Come ask me all the questions. I got you. I'll tell you all the mistakes that I made, save you some money, do all that kind of stuff. Whether it be writing a book, you want to be a rapper, I guess. I don't know. That's the first recommendation, I guess. First example I came up with. You're going to suck. First and foremost, you're going to suck before you're any good at all. Don't forget that. So multiple times throughout many episodes, I will read through and literally cringe at what I wrote because it's just not necessary. It happens. You're going to suck first, but it's better to suck first and then get good than never be bad because you didn't start. So start and try and just do something. But that being said, the long list of thank yous begins now. So like, thank you for pretty much everybody involved in the making of this book, starting from Alfonso to tell me to stop making excuses and just do it. Jess, my editor, who's amazing. Sean for allowing me to use this warehouse to even record all this. Sean's in the book multiple times as well, so shout out to Sean. Buy Rice and Grinds, buy Rice Krispies, buy all of it. Shout out to my parents, obviously, for making me who I am. Shout out to Lauren for doing all the work and actually here, and then also like putting the files together. So that's, yeah, shout out to Lauren. Just so many people involved with this book that, like, if I missed you, I apologize, but it's impossible to name everybody that helped me with this book. Goal is obviously many more, but next step is just the next one. Somebody asked me that the other day and was like, what's next for you? And instantly I was like, the next one. And he was like, you want to write another book? And I was like, bro, I got plenty of stories. I got plenty of stuff to write about. Even if I don't publish it, like, writing is a way of release for me that is literally free, and I don't have to pay for it. You know, the gym you got to pay for. There's a whole bunch of other, like, coping mechanisms, I guess. Writing your thoughts out is literally good for everyone. It's a little weird at first, but highly recommend it. But that being said, thank you to everyone for watching, for listening, being a part of it. I plan on releasing shirts soon. There's hoodies. There's 2 hoodies. Yeah, there's a purple hoodie. There's a green hoodie I accidentally ordered, but we're just going to keep it because it looks cool. This red and white long sleeve I'm wearing. There's also a black and white one. And then there's like a random like blue t-shirt that I really like that I'm going to release. Yeah, those will just be like a little anniversary kind of like party gift. Those will be available on the 12th of November. I will start advertising probably, I don't know, the following week or the week after, starting in November, because it's like 2 weeks, 3 weeks away. So got all those pictures made. Shout out to Lauren again, because again, she does all the work. But you know, I printed them. So shout out to Sean again for allowing me to use the heat press. Pretty much everything else, like Alfonso gave me the hookup in terms of how to order everything, go about it, and just make it all happen. So thanks for staying. Mark your calendars for when the anniversary is. It's November 12th. It's my birthday, by the way. That'll be the anniversary of the book. So go grab yourself a copy if you don't have one yet. But also that'll be the release of all like the hoodies and shirts and whatnot. So that's it. If you got a dream, chase it. And I will see you guys when I see you. Go do something super nice for someone who can do absolutely nothing for you, because that is the only way that you'll actually learn something from it. So yeah,